Hello everyone, this is Andrew Moscovich, and I'll be talking about restoring the lower Boulder Creek to pre-disturbance conditions. I spent a lot of time hiking by the Boulder Creek and just hanging out by it. These two pictures are pictures that I've taken at the Boulder Creek, not necessarily at the reach that I'll be talking about, but somewhere along the Boulder Creek. To orient you, the Boulder Creek begins just east of the Continental Divide in Colorado. It's located in Hydrologic Unit Region 10, Subregion 1019, and the lower Boulder Creek is a second-order stream. The reach targeted for restoration, which I'll be referring to as Restoration Reach, flows 1.06 miles northeast from 109th Street to Kenosha Road. Adjacent land uses, such as agricultural operations, gravel mining, and channel straightening to reduce area dominated by the creek, have significantly disrupted Restoration Reach. The following problems at Restoration Reach will be addressed in this restoration plan. 1. Decreased sinuosity relative to historic pre-disturbance conditions. 2. Full channel entrenchment resulting in an abandoned floodplain. And 3. Sparse or non-existent riparian vegetation. For now, we're going to focus on problem number 1, decreased sinuosity. The methods used to evaluate sinuosity are as follows. Sinuosity of Restoration Reach was computed by using Google Earth Pro to take measurements along Restoration Reach. And then to assess how sinuosity of Restoration Reach changed over time, a layover of historic aerial photographs was obtained from a report submitted to Boulder County's Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. The sinuosity of a reach is computed by dividing the channel centerline length by the length of the valley centerline. The image to the left shows that the channel centerline length is 5,591 feet approximately, and the image to the right shows the valley length is 5,409 feet in length. So the current sinuosity of Restoration Reach is 1.03. However, aerial photos dating back to 1937 indicate that the Boulder Creek had a sinuosity of approximately 1.48. That's a pretty big difference. Channelization of Restoration Reach is shown in the image to the right. The white line represents the stream path in 1937, green 1949, yellow 1955, orange 1963, magenta 1969, and blue, which is what it is currently, is 2015. And you can see that the stream has been extremely channelized over time. Therefore, active restoration is recommended at Restoration Reach to restore a sinuosity of 1.5. The proposed design is sketched to the right. Restoring a sinuosity at Restoration Reach is uniquely possible due to the lack of confinement from roads. Additionally, most land in the vicinity of Restoration Reach is owned by Boulder County Open Space. There is some of the land that is cultivated by cropland and abandoned gravel ponds. So now we're going to move on to the second problem at Restoration Reach, which is full channel entrenchment resulting in an abandoned floodplain. So here are the methods I used to determine how to reconnect the floodplain. The current entrenchment ratio was attained from survey data. Bankfull design discharge, considered to be the 1.5 recurrence discharge, was computed in ERAM's flow analysis tool by running a log Pearson type 3 analysis at USGS station 06730200. The Bankfull design width was then determined by using curves from Module 10 that related bankfull discharge to bankfull width at dynamic equilibrium. A design depth was chosen that will result in an entrenchment ratio characteristic of the pre-disturbance state of Restoration Reach, and a new entrenchment ratio was estimated by assuming that the flood-prone area width increases proportionately with height. In the process, I also used Roskin's stream classification system. Various sources published in Boulder County were used to determine the pre-disturbance Roskin stream classification of Restoration Reach. Current data was utilized in conjunction with the Roskin stream classification system to highlight how the channel has changed over time, and applicable metrics such as sinuosity, width to depth ratio, and entrenchment ratio were designed to be within the pre-disturbance Roskin stream classification. Just a little bit of background on entrenchment ratio. So the entrenchment ratio quantifies the vertical containment of the reach. To compute entrenchment ratio, the flood-prone area width is divided by the bankful width. The width of the flood-prone area is measured at the elevation that is twice the difference between the bankful height and the thaw leg of the reach. The elevation at which the flood-prone area width is measured commonly corresponds with a less than 50-year return period flood. Hence, the closer the entrenchment ratio is to 1, the higher the likelihood that the floodplain has been abandoned except for greater than 50-year return period floods. Restoration Reach was observed to have an entrenchment ratio of 1.3. Based on the Roskin stream classification system, Restoration Reach is fully entrenched. And just to clarify, I got the entrenchment ratio of 1.3 from a report. I didn't go in the field and measure that. And so I've boxed fully entrenched on the EPA figure on the right. And that gives you some sense of what an entrenchment ratio of 1 to 1.4 means. You can kind of see that the stream is basically trapped, and it would take a large flow for it to overflow the bank and reach the riparian zone. So we can actually use the Roskin stream classification system to further classify the Boulder Creek and see how it's changed. But first, let's look at the data that we're going to use in the next slide to further classify Restoration Reach. So 0.3 miles east of 109th Street, the entrenchment ratio was found to be 1.3, like we mentioned. The bankful width was found to be 67.2 feet on average. The mean bankful depth was 1.79 feet, which amounted to a width to depth ratio of 37.5. The water surface slope was 0.35%, sinuosity was 1.03, and then they found a substrate particle size distribution of 52% cobble, 29% gravel, 15.5% sand, and 3.5% silt. So after reviewing entrenchment ratio data, width to depth ratio data, sinuosity, slope, and channel material, we can tell that Restoration Reach currently resembles an F3B Roskin stream. However, after reviewing literature, there seems to be a consensus that prior to anthropogenic disturbances, Restoration Reach likely resembled a C3B Roskin stream. And the biggest difference here is the entrenchment ratio. Currently, we're at a 1.3, which puts us in the F3B category along with all the other parameters. However, a C3B stream is only slightly entrenched rather than fully entrenched and has an entrenchment ratio greater than 2.2. So that is what our design will be aiming for, an entrenchment ratio that is greater than 2.2, so that Restoration Reach will classify in the Roskin system as it used to before, and that way the floodplain will be reconnected. In order to return Restoration Reach to a C3B slightly entrenched reach, rather than a fully entrenched reach, the channel geometry must be corrected. There have been multiple studies that have correlated equilibrium bankful discharges with the 1 to 2 year recurrence interval discharge. So here I used gauge data in ERAMs and determined that the 1.5 recurrence interval discharge is approximately 661 cubic feet per second. This table from Module 10 shows that channel width increases as the square root of the bankful discharge does when streams are in equilibrium. Using this table, an ideal width for Restoration Reach is approximately 40 feet, and to maintain a width to depth ratio greater than 12, the depth of Restoration Reach will be approximately 3 feet. So I've already discussed how entrenchment ratio is calculated, but here are my calculations that you can pause and review. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me a question about them. But basically, given the new channel geometry, the entrenchment ratio would be 3.7. So like I just said, using a channel geometry of 40 feet width and 3 feet depth will result in an entrenchment ratio of 3.7 rather than 1.3, which will allow the floodplains to be breached again. And Notice that the abandoned floodplain was addressed prior to discussing the revegetation of the riparian zone, which is what we're going to talk about next. The sequencing of discussion is intentional because without floodplain breaching, minimal planted riparian vegetation will survive, and it's likely that the disappearance of riparian vegetation at Restoration Reach is due to incision and entrenchment disabling periodic overflow into the floodplain. And additionally, the proposed channel geometry will now allow Restoration Reach to be classified as a C through B reach as it was prior to disturbance. So now I'll be addressing the issue of sparse or non-existent riparian vegetation. A few methods were used to determine how to revegetate Restoration Reach. First, Restoration Reach was compared to Cottonwood Grove Reach. The target width of the riparian zone was determined by using Google Earth Pro to take measurements of vegetation coverage at Cottonwood Grove Reach. Secondly, the revegetation matrix, a searchable database with a total of 264 Colorado native species, was used to determine the species of vegetation that exist naturally at the elevation range and geographical location of Restoration Reach. And then finally, a study on the diversity and prevalence of riparian vegetation at Coal Creek, which is a tributary stream, was reviewed. Vegetation that was identified as prevalent at Coal Creek and was also identified in the revegetation matrix were selected to be planted at Restoration Reach. Although all reaches of the lower Boulder Creek have been disrupted, Cottonwood Grove Reach has a healthy riparian zone and is located 6 miles upstream of Restoration Reach. The aerial images below display the lack of riparian vegetation at Restoration Reach on the left and the thriving riparian vegetation at Cottonwood Grove Reach on the right. A survey conducted by researchers at the University of Colorado identified 149 bird species at Boulder Creek Cottonwood Grove Reach. Another study observed 20 different mammals within the Boulder Creek Cottonwood Grove Reach. At one point in time, the Boulder Creek Cottonwood Grove, in terms of vertebrate species and numbers, was determined to be the most productive vertebrate habitat in northern Colorado. Where cottonwood plains were present at Cottonwood Grove Reach, the tree coverage from the bank ranged from 20 to 100 feet. Minimum width recommendations for riparian zone varied depending on who you're talking to, from 25 to 30 feet. Given the abundant biodiversity observed at Cottonwood Grove Reach, the riparian zone at Restoration Reach will be revegetated so that at maturity, tree coverage will range from at least 30 feet to up to 150 feet. So while the biodiversity was assessed at Cottonwood Grove Reach, I couldn't find any data on the diversity of vegetation. So to determine the vegetation that will be used to revegetate the riparian zone of Restoration Reach, a revegetation matrix was used. And using that matrix, I narrowed down that there's 93 native species in the elevation range of 4,991 feet to 5,014 feet within Boulder County, which is where Restoration reaches. And then to further narrow down the species for revegetation, the prominent species observed in a study of the riparian vegetation of Coal Creek, a tributary of the lower Boulder Creek, were selected for revegetation as long as those species were also identified in the revegetation matrix. The following 5 species will be used to revegetate the riparian zone. So 1 blue grama, 2 western wheatgrass, 3 golden currant, 4 sandbar willow, which has a few different names, and then 5 plains cottonwood. Geotextiles will be staked into the ground to provide temporary erosion control and help vegetation establish on slopes. Willows and cottonwoods will be planted strategically on banks because their roots help stabilize soils. In accordance with the Manual of Bioengineering Treatments for Colorado Streams, seeds and plants will be planted during the dormant period, which is from mid-November to early March in Colorado. In conclusion, to return sinuosity to its pre-disturbance state, I'm proposing excavating a new meandering channel with a sinuosity of 1.5. To reconnect the floodplain, I'm proposing that this new channel have a width of 40 feet and a depth of 3 feet, which will result in an entrenchment ratio of 3.7 and allow Restoration Reach to classify as a C3B Roskin stream as it did beforehand. And then to rejuvenate the riparian zone, I'm proposing revegetating with blue gamma, western wheatgrass, golden currant, sandbar willow, and plains cottonwood trees, with a target width ranging from 30 to 150 feet in width, because that's been shown to promote healthy biodiversity. And here are my references cited. Looking forward to hearing your comments and answering your questions. Thanks.